But like that next level means these athletes need to fully make a living from their sport. And I don't think we should, number one, be shy about it or embarrassed about it. And we should be asking each other for help, because while the corporations generally do have our best interests in mind, I truly believe that, especially in the outdoor industry, they're still trying to maximize their dollars. And we need to make sure we're taking care of, like, protecting ourselves as well. And I think we can do that through open conversation and transparency and being a supportive community. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
All right, Adrian, episode 19 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. It's almost 2025. We've been doing this for almost a year.
How's it going? New Year.
I know. Can't believe it.
I mean, it's going great, of course. I had just awesome holidays with the fam, in the snow, at home. Like last year, we spent Christmas in Vegas, actually, because ski season hadn't really turned on yet. And we wanted to try something different. So we had like a cactus decorated with lights, things like that. And this year we're like, it's so cheesy, but I just love like the winter, real winter snow, big trees, Christmas, and like arrows getting older. So we like decided to come home, had a great week. It felt good to finally lean into skiing a little bit. But of course, where are you going to have New Year's? Las Vegas.
There's something about the fact that you have a house in Tahoe and a house in Vegas, and you're doing a white Christmas in Tahoe and Vegas New Year's. It lines up perfectly.
I feel very, very lucky. Yes. And let's be clear, I have a trailer in Vegas, but it's an awesome trailer. And it's, I mean, I know today we're, talking about the life of a professional athlete. I mean, the reality is that my life leans more into big snowy mountains, skiing and climbing them, and needing that type of fitness. So I need and want to be in Tahoe. Emily, my wife, loves Tahoe like so deeply in the community there, and it is home. It is where we will raise our kid. But to be a professional rock climber at the very highest level, winter in Tahoe means only gym training, which gets really old. And Vegas allows for the highest level of climbing with many of the best climbers in the world in the middle of winter. And so that means we end up bouncing back and forth to make our relationship work. So here
and as a pilot, you have the ability and the joy in moving back and forth reasonably easy as compared to most people.
Yeah, maybe we should do a flying episode sometime. But yeah, I fly a small plane, and that takes that like 7.5 hour drive and makes it a less than 2 hour flight, which I'm just going to keep saying this a lot this episode. Like, I'm so lucky that is true, that we can go back and forth.
Absolutely. Well, it's almost the new year. This episode will actually launch on New Year's Day. In 2024 was, a good year. It came with its challenges. One thing we both acknowledged and kind of what we were talking about is the loss in the outdoor community that 2024 brought. Certainly every year, the outdoor community has loss. The world of climbing and skiing is dangerous, and it comes with risk, and loss is a real thing. But it just felt like 2024 was a particularly tough one. There were climbing accidents, there were unrelated accidents, there were skiing accidents, but especially for American mountain guides, there were some significant losses. And I think it's an interesting conversation in pairing with the world of being a professional athlete and being a mountain guide. And a lot of the people lost were mountain guides and also professional athletes, or on the edge of being a professional athlete and pushing the limit in their sport. And obviously our hearts go out to the friends and family of those individuals, but it's an interesting conversation and kind of time to reflect on the loss of 2024.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We've obviously been talking a lot about it with friends and family, and it's hard to say. It's so not in the numbers, right? Like, I think now that we're so interconnected, we hear about I'm going to say all the fatalities in the outdoor climbing and skiing world. I'm sure we don't hear about all, but we hear about a lot more than, 20 years ago when I was in this. We might not hear about the Chamonix fatalities because we were in Palisades, or if you were in Palisades, you might not even hear about like the Colorado fatalities and vice versa, unless you're really deep into the avalanche data and things like that. So we are more connected. We are hearing more about these accidents. I think that's ultimately a good thing, to be recognizing the loss that happens and that is intrinsic to these sports. At the same time, you're right. It's like different communities get hit at different times. And the mountain guide community this year, just the American mountain guide community, especially, just got crushed. And without like naming names, I think you said it already. Like, first and foremost, like, my thoughts go to like friends and family and small mountain town communities that are like, and brands, actually, because we're going to talk about that later today, that have these losses. Like, they hurt and they're hard to recover from, and they lead to questions of whether this is worthwhile and whether it was fair and why it happened. And like, me as a professional athlete and now having a kid, like, those are conversations we're having so regularly about like how much risk is worth it, why the risk is worth it, things like that. And I think that's just, I think that's where I want to continue having more conversations in this format, on podcasts with friends over whiskey, in events, like everyone calls them fireside chats now, these little Q&A events within the outdoor community. Because I'm sure I've said this before, like, I think taking risk and taking massively outsized risks is totally acceptable and important. Like, that is how a lot of these sports are going to be pushed forward, is people willing to take completely outsized risks. So I'm not sitting here telling the next generation to take less risk in any way. At the same time, I think looking back at my career, like, I don't know, it's possible, but the ignorance I had to the risk, like, and to the reality of the risk and the pain of the risk, was something I leaned really hard into in my early career. I was just ignorant about it and chose not to go to like events of fallen climbers and things like that I didn't know so well. If I didn't have to be there, I wouldn't be there. And so I think I insulated myself a lot from that pain that was going on. And so I think, looking back, I wish I had been more open to understanding the risk and understanding the level of luck that was playing out in me having the opportunities and not getting dead. And so, like, I think there is a place for just talking about this loss, and not meaning that we shouldn't do these things or that other people shouldn't take way more risks than I do, but making sure we understand throughout our careers the role of luck.
Absolutely. I think luck plays into everything we do. And, when you pursue the higher risk sports that we do, more luck is required. And sometimes that luck isn't in our favor. And I like what you're saying of just acknowledging those risks and being aware. And I think it goes also back to honoring the legacy of the people that, did lose their life this season and in seasons past in the mountains, or just, in daily life, and making sure that, we can both learn from those experiences and honor their legacy at the same time.
100%. Well said.
Well, on that note, Happy New Year to our listeners. And, we look forward to another season of bringing you great episodes, and another year of bringing you great episodes. And here's a fun one, a good conversation with Adrian talking about the business of being a professional athlete.
The podcast is going to turn 1 in 2025. Let's go.
Welcome back to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. This is episode 19. Today we are talking with Adrian about the business of being a professional athlete. Adrian, welcome to the show. Welcome to your show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sam. As soon as you said that, I was like, shoot, I should have like had more logos on, like I had a Farinade, an Alpha Glow, and a Tin Cup, and a Sportiva. I'm blowing it. I've only got one logo, and we're talking about the business of being a professional athlete in the outdoor industry space.
Well, maybe that's the direction we're going. Cool. So, I wanted to talk to you about the business of being a professional athlete. I think it's a fascinating thing. And, admittedly, as a young boy growing up ski racing, like I always dreamed of, you go to the ski movies and you dream of being a professional skier. It's just kind of like what went through my head as a young kid. And certainly I never pursued it. But I think that a lot of people out there fantasize about being a professional athlete in some way, shape, or form. And whether that's a reality or a close reality for some people, or they've never touched the sport in their life, but they see this, glamorized life on ESPN and things like that. Like people have those thoughts about being a professional athlete. And so I thought it would be an interesting conversation with you to talk a little bit about the business of that and what that looks like in your day to day and how the realities of being a professional athlete are as compared to what is seen by the general public.
It's all exactly the same.
Totally. Yeah. That's what we'll dive into.
Rainbows and puppies all day long.
So starting off, I think it's helpful to set the groundwork and understand like what your path to being a professional athlete looked like. I think maybe for you, you might actually have a little bit of a different path in that you started as a mountain guide and that led into your career as both a mountain guide and a professional athlete and a business owner. So tell us a little bit about kind of how that all transpired over your career.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And maybe we should even start. I was thinking as we were prepping for this episode, I was like, I got to ask Sam. Yeah, maybe we each have to answer this, but how do you define a professional athlete in the outdoor space? What are you saying I am, or what are we, what limits would you put on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. A lot of people talk about like you are paid dollars or a currency to do a sport.
Not just like free creatine. That doesn't
exactly.
count.
Well, I mean, that's a good conversation, right? Because there's tiers, I guess, of this. But, you are paid a currency to do a sport. Now, I am paid a currency to do a sport, but that's different because I am working as a guide, and ski patrollers are working as a patroller, or ski instructors are working as a ski instructor. But you are paid to represent a brand. And I think that's where the difference lies to me.
Yeah, love it. I like that. I think being paid, like you said, a currency in some form for doing a sport for one's own goals, I think, with one's own goals, whereas all those other things you mentioned, like patrolling or ski instructing or being a mountain guide, the focus is actually maybe on other people's goals and allowing them to access them through safety or education or guidance. Whereas I think a professional athlete is like you're going after your own goals. Simple word. Whether that's like winning a competition or climbing a mountain or skiing a line, it's like it's in some ways more selfish. It's more for oneself, even though you might have teammates. All right,
totally. And we talk about currency, I think, because like there is a level of athlete, maybe they're not quite professional yet, where brands are supporting them with product, and absolutely. Then there is a level where brands are supporting them with product and currency. And so I think that is an important differentiation. Like a lot of people are getting product out there, and the people they have a salary, they have a contract. That is where that professional athlete, in my opinion, begins.
Yep. And that begins to get to my path, and probably many, many athletes in the outdoor industry's path, where it started for me with free shoes. So even before I was a mountain guide, I think I was 17 years old and a freshman in college in DC, and the local La Sportiva rep, Bill Pelkey, who I still love to death, and like he was a legend on the East Coast, and kind of gave me the beginning inkling that there was something here, or that I had something. I mean, I was a mediocrely average climber in my teen years, in the same way that on the grand scale, I was a mediocrely average skier. You mentioned going to the ski movies and dreaming of being a pro skier. I did exactly the same thing, right? And like all my friends were like freestyle. So, moguls, aerials, and ballet. So that's what I was trying to do. And I was not good. And I did not not, and then on the other side, I didn't have a race background, but I obviously loved skiing. We've talked about that before. I just poured my heart and soul in like every damn day after doing my homework, going and skiing. And climbing was kind of the same. I started rock climbing at age 12. I started trad leading, so placing gear on pitches without bolts and no rope up above me at age like 14. So by the time I went to school at 17, I had like a reasonable set of skills, and I'd spent a lot of time in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, which are not that tall, but they're just like really
Rugged.
burly and rugged and have terrible weather. And I'd almost gotten myself killed more times than like my mom would want to hear about. And so like all that, I had a foundation. Went to college in DC. That's where I met kind of my mentor, Chris Warner, who was a well-known climber as well as guide and had a sponsorship with La Sportiva. And that's how I met this old dude, Bill Pelkey. He probably wasn't old back then, but he seemed old to me. And like he started slinging me some climbing shoes and my first pair of boots for 6,000-meter climbs. That did not make me a pro athlete in my eyes, but I'll tell you what, I thought I had made it. Like someone had noticed me and I had gotten something for free that I couldn't afford. And I think that is still to this day, so many pro athletes in this space's path is like a local rep or a local head of team or a local shop seeing something, a spark, and throwing some product that athlete's way. And I think the next step from that, unless you're a true protege, and we could talk about proteges separately, but like the next step to that is still not a contract with money to pay, like, so I can eat. Like the next thing that happened to me was I started to get offered very small amounts to support me doing an expedition. We'll talk more about this, but I was going to mountain guide in Peru and I wanted to stay 3 weeks more and try to do a new route on a peak like Kayesh or something like that. And someone would agree to give me $500 or $800 to help support that 2 weeks so I could stay. And so that was the next step, was like expedition support. And then probably the next step after that was getting invited on an expedition by Chris, that he had an expedition fully supported that included plane tickets and food and hotels and logistics support and permits and all the gear you needed for the trip. So all of a sudden I have a full outfit from a clothing company that doesn't exist anymore named Moonstone. Rad little company that Columbia ultimately bought and killed. But so then all of a sudden I was getting a full kit and had all the equipment I needed. And it was all new, but it wasn't really my deal. It was like I was tagged on to someone else. And that was that next level of opportunity. And it wasn't until, probably my, late 20s, almost 30, where I finally got my first paid deal, where it was like, not only are we going to support expeditions and you're going to get all the gear you want, but you're also going to get a base salary. It wasn't enough to live on by any means, but it was enough. It was real. It was supporting just my day-to-day life and allowing me to focus more on my sport. And that's I think the key to the progression and why it's important, like as well as being the coolest thing in the world to be able to make money doing what you absolutely love. It is the only way to put the hours in that are actually necessary to be at the pinnacle of a sport, is to not also need to be, in all my early 20s, I was also valet parking cars and waiting tables and bartending and catering fancy parties in Aspen. And all that time was taking away from time that I could have been ice climbing or rock climbing or skiing. And so obviously that's what that money started to allow me to do, was lessen some of those other obligations and focus on truly building my skill set and experience.
And I think it's important to note that throughout that whole process, you were also mountain guiding. And so you had this exposure to the industry. You were meeting people, you were talking to brands through this job. And I think, when I was growing up, it was like, yeah, if you just ski a lot, someone's going to see you if you're good enough. And that's not the reality. You have to be in a place, and whether that's, competition climbing or free ride skiing or mountain guiding, you have to be in a place where you're connecting with these people that are going to be able to move you through that progression as a professional athlete or towards being a professional athlete.
That's absolutely right. Like, of course, it takes not only talent and hard work, but also that luck. But the luck of meeting the right people and getting those opportunities is in large part, like you said, of being in putting yourself in the right places to meet those people, to have those experiences, and to maybe get noticed. Back when I was going through this process, we're talking about 90s and early 2000s. There was still no real like internet presence, and certainly no like Instagram or things like that. So it wasn't happening yet through social media, and I'm sure
We'll dive
touch on
in.
that as well. But yeah, so you needed to be in some of those right places. And the mountain guide piece is super important, right? Like, and those two things in the big mountain climbing that I'm sponsored for, right? So I'm not like, I didn't go through the comp world and get sponsored for rock climbing. I didn't go through the race or freestyle or free ride now today big mountain comps. They didn't exist when I was growing up, but like I didn't go through any of those paths to my first sponsorships. I went through the path of mountain guiding because my focus was big mountains, and big mountains, high altitude mountains around the world. These expeditions are so expensive. And so, as well as knowing that I did like education and being a teacher and enabling others' goals, that's always been kind of fundamental to me. I was like a biology TA in school. And before that, in high school, I taught wakeboarding from my local marina. So I knew I liked teaching, which guiding has a big component of. But the other thing was I could not figure out how to get, I knew I was good at altitude I did my first trip to 20,000 feet when I was 17. I knew I had something there. I finally was finding something where I like excelled in sport, but I couldn't afford to do those trips. And so mountain guiding was an obvious path and has been a path for generations of climbers before me to have essentially someone else pay to get to go to progressively taller and taller mountains around the world. And so you're right, that kind of like skill set and career was growing in parallel with professional climbing. And I think that was common in this kind of big mountain world. Steve House, Vince Anderson, they were all mountain guides as well as professional athletes doing their own expeditions. And in Europe, the two, even at the highest levels of rock climbing and skiing, are really intertwined. Many of the highest level, best paid professional athletes in Europe are also fully qualified mountain guides. I think on their side, it adds safety, it adds to recognition, and it is this other path of financial support. In the US, maybe that's slightly less common, except in the high altitude world, but it provided a fantastic path for me. I was gaining so much experience, so much like notice. I was spending, like we've talked about, 7-8 months a year on high altitude peaks, which is impossible for virtually everyone else on the planet to spend that much time out there if it's not your job. And that path actually took off first. So I was guiding at a pretty high level and building a reputation while still mostly just getting those free shoes and free kit and, and then a few $1,000s here and there. And then it was when all the pieces came together where I did some of my more notable ascents and ski descents in the Himalaya, combined with, I really think I started to figure out, and this is an important piece of the puzzle, unless you're I think if you're absolutely the best or the once in a generation figure in sport, you might be able to do nothing but that and make a great living, be a professional athlete. But for me, I was one of the best, but absolutely not the best at anything I was doing. But it turned out I was also good at and enjoyed kind of the work of being a professional athlete. And so in my early days, what that especially meant was like writing, either for magazine pieces or for blogs, my own blog. And then number two, I just loved presenting, giving slideshows, storytelling in this in-person way. And so I started doing that very early on. You can imagine the like early 20s guy comes back from an expedition and goes to the local like climbing shop, like outdoors shop. For me, it was like Hudson Trail Outfitters because I was living in the mid-Atlantic at the time. And I'd give a slideshow about what I did in Nepal that year. And they were all free. No one was making any money, but I was learning to speak in front of groups, first of 30 people, and then of 50 people, and then of 100 people, and then a couple hundred people. And that started to I think enabled me to then go to brands at something called the Outdoor Retailer Show, which barely limps along anymore, but it used to be what you had to do if you were an aspiring athlete. You go to brands and show the reach I was having to people through my guiding, through my speaking, through my writing, and eventually through social media, which then enabled actual deals.
So we'll talk a little bit about that. I want to understand like what you do to secure a brand. And I know now you have an agent, but back, when you were first reaching out to brands, you talk about going to Outdoor Retailer, you talk about, essentially pitching a brand, probably making phone calls, sending emails. What did that process look like? And, for every sponsor you had, how many attempts were you making, or how many people were you reaching out to for that kind of category of sponsorship?
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about at some point talent management or having an agent. Today that is such a massive part of my world. I'm so fortunate to be part of the RXR team, who has this incredible stable of athletes in the outdoor industry, and they have helped me so much in my career. So maybe we'll get deeper in that. But going early, yeah, there was no one representing me, and there was basically no one representing anyone except maybe CAA, the big Hollywood talent, would occasionally have that like generational talent, right? Like right now, I know Tommy was with CAA for a long time, Tommy Caldwell. I think there was one before that. It might have been Lynn, but truly like these just generational
the
talents.
Best of the best.
The best of the best. But otherwise, people didn't have representation. That wasn't a thing in the 90s and early 2000s. And so, I don't think this is like a self-help or how to live your best life podcast, but if it was, it's like I was about to say, like, I was such a nerd about it, but the advice is like, be such a nerd about your career, right? Like, and be like, I think I had to remove a lot of ego and kind of self-consciousness to the process. Like I learned, I was very fortunate to have like a super academic family that really valued both hard work and like good grades. And then I went to a great college, where the expectation was really high of like the work that you put in. So when I started to do this, like I would, before going to that Outdoor Retailer show where everyone is a dirtbag, right? Like 99% of people in the industry are dirtbags. I was going with like Kinko's produced, beautiful packets with color photos of where I was going. And my dad had helped me with like stats in an Excel spreadsheet and turning it into like little graphs of my like viewership and return on investment and stuff like this. And like probably 75% of the people I gave those packets to and tried to have meetings with, they laughed at me and threw it in the trash. But like enough people didn't that started to give me opportunities. So that's exactly what I was doing. I was trying to utilize people I had met in the outdoor industry who were friends, asking them to introduce me to people at brands so that I could get, everyone else has a 30-minute meeting. I get like a 7-minute meeting, but I got to sit down with someone and kind of be like, here's who I am, and here's what I want to do next year. And I think this is why I'm a good fit for your brand. And even then, I remember talking about this idea of like, which is very common now, like return on investment. Without social media, without the data, it was very hard to explain to show what a return of an athlete was. But there were athlete teams, Mohammed had one, North Face had one, Sportiva had one. So no one was making much, but that was the idea. And so you go in and hustle and have lots of conversations and then go to like the parties and the beer happy hours and the movie premieres and just try to be around was really important. And eventually more and more, I started getting opportunities there. And then you start to cobble together the shoe sponsor. I think I always say La Sportiva was my first sponsorship because of those first shoes when I was 17 years old. And then Moonstone was my first clothing sponsor. But Marmot became like a real deal. And then, Sunto for watches, and then Kanan for sunglasses. Like, these brands started to build to where it could have been a living as a standalone, but it would have been a really, really difficult, like in the back of the truck living. And by the early 2000s, I wanted more than that, more stability. I wanted to start my own business, all these things. So I was also mountain guiding at the same time. And so I was making some money from my mountain guiding and some money from my sponsorships and continuing to try to build the skill set. And then really two things happened. Like, and this is where the luck comes in or just the grind, right? So now we're talking about I graduated college in 97. By 2007, I'm kind of like scraping by and making it work. And then it was another probably 2007 is also when I started climbing 8,000 meter peaks, the tallest peaks in the world. And it was 2009 when I ended up on my first like TV show, Discovery Channel's Everest Beyond the Limit. And it was also 2009 where like I finally had enough experience on the biggest mountains in the world, only 2 years in, but like 2 years into 8,000 meter peaks to Everest and stuff like that. But where I had enough opportunity to kind of like shine, to do something different than most of the other climbers there were doing. And that's when the flywheel finally started to roll. But that's a good, 12 years into being a full-time climber and guide.
Absolutely. And what were some of the brands that you worked with starting in 2009 when that kind of flywheel started to roll, as you said? Like, who were the brands that kind of first really made an impact in your career as a professional athlete?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I guess I've mostly mentioned them already. Like, that really was the Marmot time. Marmot was the first brand that really believed in me, that started giving me real funding for personal expeditions and for living and training. So that was huge for me. Sportiva finally started to come in a real way. I mentioned Canon and Sunto. I'm trying to think about other early brands, but those were really the important ones and really helped me in those initial years. Edelrid actually was my first kind of like hard goods sponsor, and I didn't have a my first ski sponsor actually turned out to be La Sportiva, because La Sportiva moved into skis in like 10, 11, and they were not good. I mean, they were really good at what they were made for, which was like ultralight, like going far in the backcountry expedition. Yeah. But the thing is, I also just loved like skiing Palisades. Like I was still doing 50 days a year at Palisades. I was still, at that phase, I was going
on Sportivas.
I was heli ski guiding, like, on Sportivas. And so, obviously that was like, and they still, Sportiva skis are fantastic today. So please go try them, even though I'm not sponsored by Sportiva on the ski side. Like they make great products and they've been amazing to me through my life. But obviously, as I started to do that higher end skiing, like starting to try to ski 8,000 meter peaks and stuff like that, that's when I started looking for a ski sponsor and finally joined Blizzard and Technica. And that really helped me to up my ski game. And then I guess the next turning point in my career was when I joined Eddie Bauer, because Eddie Bauer had a completely different level of funding for its athletes. It was one of the big players, along with like North Face at the time and Patagonia, that were paying like real salaries and willing to put together $1 million expeditions to the biggest mountains in the world that allow for filming and all these different things. And so that was kind of the next big step in my career in 2015, along with joining RXR. So finally having like real talent management and capturing like the firefly in the bottle or the lightning in the bottle, which was for me, believe it or not, Snapchat, being one of the first athletes to sort of move from Facebook and Instagram to Snapchat.
Amazing. The digital world, the influence of the digital world on professional athletes.
That's our entrance into the digital world. Exactly.
Well, before we dive into that and some of your obligations as an athlete, you've talked a little bit about like having a ski sponsor or having a hard goods sponsor. And so to clarify that a little bit, you're talking about sponsorship categories. And I think that's important to note that like you have a clothing sponsor, you don't have 5 clothing sponsors. You have a hard goods sponsor, you don't have 3 hard goods sponsors. And so what do those categories look like? What are kind of the big categories for you? And what do the different tiers of categories look like? I'm sure that, a watch sponsor is not paying the same amount as a clothing sponsor, just given how much product they're supporting you with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is going to differ for everybody a little bit, but certainly my goal has always been really long-term sponsorships. So not signing really any one-year sponsorships, not doing any one-off like posts, certainly, like just uh, that's a little bit different side of the business. I've always looked for long-term partnerships with companies that I just love and kind of believe in. And yeah, they kind of separate out, like you said. And so for most athletes like me, it'll start especially in the outdoor industry, like endemic sponsorships. And having an apparel sponsor is usually the like cornerstone sponsor for most people. The reason is that a company that makes, like you said, a watch or a pair of sunglasses or something really dorky, like the best crampons in the world, like they're just not going to have the type of budgets of an apparel sponsor, which can reach a much larger marketplace, a much larger audience. And so your apparel sponsor will usually be the cornerstone, and it's usually one. They might also, like mine, make, tents, sleeping bags, things like that. So for me, it was kind of Moonstone to Marmot to Eddie Bauer to Black Diamond. And Black Diamond is kind of a fun story in and of itself because I've literally been trying to join the team for like since I was 25. Like they're just such a core aspirational brand. I have always had kind of like the best cutting edge, maybe not the best known, but some of the best athletes out there on their team. They started in climbing and then they moved into ski. And they're one of the few companies out there where like I literally use every single product they make, from their running kit to their rock climbing kit to their ice climbing kit to their high altitude kit to their skiing kit, like every single thing, which I just love. So I feel very lucky to have landed there and finally twisted their arm enough to get a place on their global team. But yes, that's sort of cornerstone. It's going to be a longer deal. Hopefully it's going to be more money, and the expectations are much greater. Like we have real contracts, and this is some of the stuff that, as Emily and I have the opportunity to mentor younger athletes coming into this game, like you do need a lawyer to look at a contract, and the contracts that you get sent are not set in stone. Like this is the only option. You can negotiate as you become more savvy. And I think it's important to negotiate because it's the health of the partnership, right? Like a lot of times, let's say someone sends like, you're going to post 6 times a month on such and such platform. Like that might be written in your contract. If you hate that platform, it is very important that you negotiate that and say, either take less money because you're going to do less of that, or be like, I really don't want those obligations on posting, but you only put in there that I have to do 5 days at events a year, let's say service days, we call them. Why don't we make that 10? Because I love going to events and giving slideshows. And so there's that negotiation. And as you get to the highest level of the sport, they're like real jobs, even though we're contractors. And we might want to mention that too. But like, I might have 30 service days, like, and all of those entail flying somewhere and going to an event and doing this and then flying back. One service day might actually be a 3-day obligation. Don't worry, I'm not saying my job's is like burdensome as like a full-time salary desk job, but like it is real work. And more and more today, one of the things that's changed over the past 5 years, it used to be you had a lot of social media obligations, but no one actually tracked. Now there are just fantastic tools out there for tracking those things. And so the expectation is that if you said in your contract you're going to do something, that you do those things. So they're becoming much more professional relationships. At the same time, that means that they can be more financially beneficial, right? Like because the brands can now more easily see the return.
Yep.
I'm going way off on tangents. You asked about like categories.
So top tier clothing brand.
Clothing. Then second is going to be like the tools you use. What I call hard goods is usually going to be second tier for most athletes.
So and it's like a ski footwear.
Ski and boot on one side, on the climbing side, more, footwear, climbing shoes and mountaineering boots. But it also might be like, ropes and trad, the gear we use to climbs, ice screws. It might be safety gear for, avalanche backcountry skiing and ski mountaineering and things like that. So kind of it's still very much endemic to the sport, but hard goods are usually great categories. Then there are the outdoor industry categories that are a little bit peripheral, but still like essential, and different people love different things. I love sunglasses. So I've always had a sunglass sponsor. It's not a lot of money usually, but they're just these fantastic companies. And I have sensitive eyes, so I wear sunglasses always. I'm a nerd for data, like we've talked about already. So GPS watches, those technology has always been super important to me. So Sunto to Garmin. Then I went for a while to like the Swiss watch world and had like Favre Luba, like a super high end, because like it always felt like that was the ultimate, right, was like a Rolex. And so
Yep.
Favre Luba was the closest I ever got to a Rolex. You know, they make like $10,000 watches, but it turned out it wasn't the best tool for me. So I eventually went back and found Coros, just this company that not only makes fantastic GPS and health tech, but also really leans into the climbing world, whereas most other GPS watches are leaning into like running and cycling and tri and stuff like that. So that's just been a fantastic sponsor. So we kind of have those outdoor industries, and they, for better or worse, those seem to come or go a little bit more. Like a company has some budget, they work with something, you might do a few years and maybe budgets change or focuses change, things like that. So a little less crucial or long-term perhaps than the cornerstone, but they're still fantastic, like great small companies. And I think athletes can help them so much with their reach. And then there's like the what we would call non-endemic sponsors. And that's where a talent management agency has really helped me the most. They might be in the tech world, the insurance world, the pharmaceutical world, the alcohol world. So, you know, right now I have a sponsorship from Tin Cup. They make great whiskey. I love whiskey. I always did bring
That's
whiskey.
not an endemic sponsor.
They're mountain whiskey, but you know, I always did bring whiskey on expeditions, and now it's something I can lean into and storytell around, and you know, hopefully show. You know, obviously, alcohol sponsors, some lean away from them. Like I hope I can show a healthy relationship with alcohol and how it fits into partnership and camaraderie and celebration of peak experiences. And then some of my biggest expeditions have been thanks to like truly outside the industry sponsors. Like I was sponsored by Samsung for 3 years as they were trying to compete with the Galaxy phones against iPhone and show the level of camera they had and things like that. And those years, that sponsor is a huge part of why I was able to do very, very large Himalayan expeditions with big teams. But those things are so hard to control. You'll see like all of a sudden, you know, a peak athlete is sponsored by Squarespace for a year or two, or Samsung, or some of the car manufacturers, the vehicle manufacturers, and I mean, these deals can be transformative, life-changing, but they are only partly due to your talent as an athlete. And I think they have a lot to do with luck. It's not even talent and hard work. And then there's like this luck piece.
Absolutely, yeah. And they seem to come and go a little bit more. It's not like you have a sponsorship with Visa and then you fill it with, you know, Amex when the contract expires. It seems like, you know, you might have a contract with Visa for a few years and that's like your bonus. And then that space might be open for many years.
That's absolutely right. Exactly. Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
You know, you've talked a little bit about representation, lawyers, contracts. You have a signed contract with all of these brands that you are now represented by. Obviously, there are different levels in terms of both what you're being paid and also what your requirements for the brand are. What do some of your contractual obligations look like? And what are the expectations put forth on you?
It's a great question. They all have some similarities. We've talked a little bit about it already. First and foremost, and I think it's sometimes easy to forget this, they are like, I guess you call them like at-will agreements. Both parties can get out, especially if you breach the contract. And first and foremost, I think and it's in every contract, you need to be a great representative of the sport and community. And that language might be kind of loose, but I think it's purposely loose because we all kind of know what being a great representative of the sport is and when we're not being that. Obviously, things like, arrests don't go great with professional athlete contracts.
The media catches on as well.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be out there. You need to be doing things. There's a general acceptance of that, even beyond the specific terms of the agreement, that you are doing this thing. You're living this life. So that's always kind of like paragraph 1 and 2 and 3. And then it gets into like specific terms, and they're usually going to include some level of service days. There might be events, slideshows, clinics at some of the big festivals, going to the offices and hanging out with employees, whether that's going climbing or sitting in meetings or having dinners or giving slideshows to employees is always a use of service days. So there's almost always that. There's usually a design component that you will work with designers on either new products or improving current products. And there'll be kind of like a time estimate of how much time you'll put to that. And along with that kind of product testing, there might be some terminology of how you product test. And that's a great example of like some people are so good at that. Like, I mean, even though he's not really a sponsored athlete, we know like Logan Talbot can not only, everyone knows he's my partner in Alpenglow Expeditions and a mountain guide, fully certified IFMJ mountain guide. He can not only break stuff, which all professional athletes and mountain guides are really good at breaking stuff, but he can also kind of determine why something broke. And then he can really give helpful suggestions of what could improve the product. Me, like, I'm really good at breaking this stuff, and I'm pretty good at having like pie in the sky, dreamy of ideas of how my gear should be better. I have not a clue how to get to those improvements or to have suggestions of what to do. And so that's like something all the brands that work with me know. Like you bring me into like a workshop and like, well, what would you do here? Would you sew it this way? I'm like, I hate arts and crafts. I don't want to sew it anyway. I want you to sew it and give it to me and tell me why it's going to work, kind of thing. And so you're going to have strengths and weaknesses in these different areas. And again, I think that's just important to cover. So we got the service days, we got the design, we got the breaking shit and product testing. And then the biggest one in every contract I have now, I'm sure there are contracts out there where it doesn't exist, but it is social media obligations. And those can be very specific, like this many posts on this platform per month, let's say. And they can sometimes have reams, paragraphs of descriptions of they have to include these tags, they have to show the product, they don't have to show the product, or they can be really in depth. Or there are contracts where they're just like, you're going to do a minimum of, let's say, 12 posts a year, and you choose what platform, what content, just make sure to tag the brand. Companies still go really differently in those directions.
And do you find that your bigger sponsors are more specific and the littler sponsors are more general, or is it vice versa?
It's actually vice versa often.
Yeah.
And I get it because I run a small business, right? And every dollar I spend from my marketing budget at Alpenglow Expeditions, I need to know it's going to kill, right? Because it's just a dollar. It's not like the dollar you pay a mountain guide and you get this amazing team member and like the value is so clear to the product. A dollar in marketing, even though I know how much marketing is worth, it's a dollar out into the ether that may or may not have a value. And so for a small business, which a lot of my smaller sponsors are, those individual dollars are hugely important. And so a lot of times it's those brands that want to know, like, we need exactly this and we need it on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. and we like they've got a plan and they need you to fit into it. And I really try to honor that. It's interesting, like this is where an agent really helps. Like every sponsor needs to fit into a structure. It's not fair that someone paying this amount down here gets the same deliverables as this amount up here. And an agent can help to differentiate those things. At the same time, I think it's equally important to put as much passion and love into this one as this one. And if you can't do that, I don't think you should have those smaller sponsors anymore. And that's what some athletes choose, is like, I can't put the amount of love and passion into this because I'm too busy. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to focus on 3 or 4 bigger ones. And that's cool. I do think one thing you often see new athletes, especially when they have a moment and they break in, is they'll end up with way too many sponsors,
Little sponsors.
and it dilutes all of them, and it's impossible to manage, and everybody gets frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that can be where, for instance, professionals or a little consulting or just some mentorship, like a lot of the best athletes in the climbing and ski world right now, I think, are also fantastic mentors. People like Michelle Parker and Cody Townsend on the ski side, and people like Emily Harrington and Alex Honnold and Tommy Caldwell on the rock climbing side. Like, these people are very available to their communities and want so much to help the next generation. And so I would encourage people not to be afraid to ask. I think in the outdoor community, there's always been kind of like a challenging edge to the money of
Mm-hmm.
of climbing and skiing, because we're meant to do it for the purity. But the bottom line is, like, a 25-year-old wannabe professional skier needs to eat. And there's going to be a time and a place where need to eat means bartending or waiting tables or driving Uber or delivering for Postmates or whatever it is today that I don't even really understand. But like, to get to that next level, to be the best, it's going to need to come purely from the sport, just like we talked about. So you can pour all your energy into experience, training, and then recovery. Driving, bartending from 5 p.m. until 2 in the morning is not recovery for your next day's performance. It's just not, even though we've all done it and we've made it work. But like, that next level means these athletes need to fully make a living from their sport. And I don't think we should, number one, be shy about it or embarrassed about it. And we should be asking each other for help, because while the corporations generally do have our best interests in mind, I truly believe that, especially in the outdoor industry, they're still trying to maximize their dollars. And we need to make sure we're taking care of, like, protecting ourselves as well. And I think we can do that through open conversation and transparency and being a supportive community.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running a business and you're running a business as well as the athlete. And you have to think about the business that you're running and how that all functions. You've talked a little bit about sponsors that maybe weren't the best fit for a category over the years, a wash sponsor, a ski sponsor early on. How do you balance the need for, that support financially and what's right for your business with representing a brand appropriately?
It is just like you said, it's a balance, right? And so I made a decision early on that I'm never going to represent a brand that I truly don't think works and works for me. I think the best example, we've talked about this before, maybe on the podcast, is like, I don't drink beer. I just don't like it. I have been approached by beer sponsors with real money, and I tried to drink the beer, like, to be like, well, maybe I could become a beer drinker. But ultimately, it's like, if something truly isn't you, just don't do it. And same goes for, like, if you, like, I was going to pick on a shoe company, but I won't. Like if you climb in Yosemite and that's your total passion, is climbing big walls in Yosemite, and the only shoe you can do that in is La Sportiva, then maybe you shouldn't take, even though they make fantastic shoes for the gym, like, maybe you shouldn't take that sponsorship. Or if you do,
Mm-hmm.
you need an axe out, like, it needs to be in the contract that it's clearly, you need to eat, but you also need to make sure you can proudly represent the brand, right? And like, that happened to me when I joined Eddie Bauer. Their gloves honestly were not good enough for climbing the tallest mountains in the world. And I, struggle with cold and frost damage and all this stuff. Like, I had to have a contractual, like, opt out that I wouldn't wear their gloves until the design process that I got to be a part of, make gloves that would work for me. And I agreed to things like blacking out logos of the Black Diamond gloves that I was going to be wearing and making sure I never shouted them out and things like that. So there are options for that as you get deeper into contracts. But yeah, so I try to choose brands that I truly believe in. At the same time, I mean, I made a joke that I've been trying to join Black Diamond for 25 years. They've only been in apparel for, let's say, 10, but like that might have been my pinnacle, but I couldn't do it. So I chose another clothing brand that believed in me and that I could totally support. Like Eddie Bauer made fantastic clothing in their First Ascent line that I represented. So I could truly stand behind them, even though they might not have been my like dream brand from when I was a kid. And like,
Yeah.
that's the reality of business.
I think that's an interesting point. It's a brand that you stand behind, but if you were going to a store to buy a specific product, it might not be the brand that you were to choose to pay your dollars for, but that's okay because you still believe in the product that you're supporting.
100%. You got it. Yep.
And so talk a little bit about like your relationship with Sportiva over the years. You've talked about that being one of your early sponsors, and I believe they're still a sponsor of yours today. They make a wide range of products from, big wall climbing shoes to ski gear to ski boots. You talked about having a deal with them for skis and ski boots early on in your career and then moving over to Black Diamond Technica. How does that work where you were working with a brand, but they have a category that you're obligated with another brand on?
Yeah, these can be tricky. And I think, again, like starting from a point of mutual respect and understanding we're all trying to like get certain things out of a partnership. And so like, I think when I was having those conversations, like, I really need to leave your skis, but I really want to stay on for your mountain boots and rock shoes. It's a hard conversation, but at the same time, like, everyone's adults and respectful. They know they're making their skis or did at that time. I'm not super familiar with the line today. Like, they knew they were making skis for one segment of the ski industry, the ultralight, leaning into almost like skimo, like wearing Lycra and racing segment of the market. And they knew that I loved these other things. And so once an opportunity came, I'm sure it was a business decision for them that I still provided enough value for the dollars they were paying in the climbing segment to keep me and to opt out of this. And there are just loads of examples out there in the marketplace. North Face being the big behemoth, like they make running shoes, and they even make mountain boots now. But a lot of their best athletes choose to use La Sportiva or Scarpa or Hoka or other companies. And they're negotiations. They're negotiations. Yep. And if and when it becomes important enough for a company, for instance, Black Diamond has been working for years on their rock shoes, and they're getting better and better and better. There may come a day where it becomes important enough to them that they say, our global athletes have to be truly head to toe. And you, Adrian Ballinger, have to make a decision. Are you willing to switch? This is no writing on the wall. This has not happened. Yeah. No one suggested this. I hope I'm with Sportiva for the rest of my life. But those are completely reasonable things for a brand to ask or suggest, and for an athlete to have to make a decision about. I think a lot of times, and I think especially like if you look at other sports, you might notice athletes changing sponsors all the time. The outdoor industry is so much smaller, and I think this is a good thing. We feel like such a family a lot of the times that maybe making those business decisions feels like really hard. And I think we need to keep the family feel. We need to like lean into the fact that we are a very special community that supports and helps each other. And we need to be okay with like business decisions needing to happen sometimes on both sides.
Well, and on the flip side to that, you've had other experiences, Black Diamond, for example, where when you were leaving Blizzard Technica, you spoke to Black Diamond and it wasn't a fit at the time. Talk a little bit about that experience and how, working with that brand kind of transpired.
Yeah. So, I mean, like we've talked about, Black Diamond, has just been this like brand that I've had conversations with over decades. Like I almost signed a contract all the way back in 2015. So there's been like informal conversations and then like all the way to 20-page formal lawyers involved, like ready to go. And then for whatever reason, one side or the other making a different decision. But I've always stayed great friends with so many key people in the brand, from all the way to the top, like Colin Powick, who was the head of product and things like that, to, engineers like Chris Thomas, to, people in the marketing department. And so I've just had a really close relationship with a lot of people. And so when Eddie Bauer dropped all of its athletes, which was a really
Well,
sudden moment.
but before that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when you were leaving Blizzard, you spoke with Black Diamond about skis and they wanted you to use their apparel as well. And you were already in a contract with Eddie Bauer. And so
Totally.
this whole Black Diamond experience has kind of melded. And
Yeah.
but I
God, you
think
remember my career better than I do. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Like, I was trying to join Black Diamond a few years ago for hard goods only. So just skis, harnesses, climbing gear, ropes, crampons, ice axes, all that stuff, and not clothing. And you're absolutely right that at that time, Black Diamond was like, nope, we're only leaning into global athletes, which means apparel and hard goods. We're not spending any more money on hard goods only athletes. And that comes and goes, right? That was just a wave. And it was a period in time for them where they were like, we're only doing this. That's what we need. And I was like, well, I'm contractually obligated and happy in many ways where I am. And so it wasn't a good fit. So that was one of many stops along the way until it finally all fit together.
I just think it's interesting how, an athlete can have like a carve out an exclusion, like this category within your product line doesn't work for me. But a brand oftentimes also says, this is the category within our brand that we're really focused on. And you have to be all in on this as well. And so that, that example right there kind of highlights that.
Absolutely.
And so, Eddie Bauer had a whole situation and that allowed you to leave Black Diamond. What happened with Eddie Bauer?
This is another place where I think, like, I loved Eddie Bauer. I had so many good years. There are so many good people at that company, and they worked really hard to become a pinnacle, like, level outdoor brand, supporting the highest level athletes in climbing and skiing and big mountain, which maybe wasn't their original DNA. They spent a long time doing it, and they were an incredible family to me and many other great athletes. And some of my just best experiences as an athlete were with Eddie Bauer, from climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen to K2 without supplemental oxygen to skiing a lot of my 8,000 meter peaks, to meeting and getting to share those experiences with just best partners in the world, from Topo to Kala to Corey Richards, Melissa Knott, Dave Morton, like so many of the best, Paige Clausen, so many of the best climbers that I respect. And so it was an amazing team and an amazing time. Ultimately, at the highest levels of the company, they made a marketing decision, which was that their brand DNA was less Arc'teryx, North Face, Black Diamond than it was maybe like an LL Bean or a Columbia. And so they decided that high-end, highly paid, cutting-edge athletes were not representing their brand. And where I give them credit is, like, they wanted to lean very hard into making these sports and activities more accessible to more people. And they felt that selling, $500 Gore-Tex jackets and $800 down jackets, which is what the pinnacle athletes wanted and what it costs. You need those products. You need a lot of expensive products to support, people like us. If they wanted to bring more people into the sport and encourage more access to the sport, they thought one of the best ways to do it was to make their products cheaper. And one of the areas you can cut is marketing. And so that's the part I respect. The part that they were challenged was in the way that they did it. It just wasn't a super clean break with a lot of us. And if I'm remembering my timeline right, it was during COVID. So it was a really stressful time for contractors with basically no support, which is what athletes are. And so that handling rollout was super messy and left a lot of us like very insecure in our position in the industry and all the rest. And I wish they had handled it better. And I'm guessing the PR fallout from the way they handled it, they wish they had handled it better as well. So, but I do think it's important, like, sometimes it's easy to get on the Reddit threads or the Twitter threads and just read like this outpouring of like what felt like hatred, or like they can't do this. And it's like, they're a business. They've chosen to move their marketing in a different direction. Maybe a company used to support F1 and they decided NASCAR was a better fit. Like companies get to choose those things, but hopefully respect people and the hurt that those decisions can cause and manage it as best as possible. So that's what happened, and all of a sudden I and quite a few others, all my teammates were like free agents without that cornerstone sponsor.
And so they eliminated their athlete team altogether. Did they maintain any ambassadors or representatives of their brand?
Yeah, so they did, and it's obviously a couple of years ago now, but I think the harsh way of looking at what they did or were doing was they decided to lean into what we would call influencers and influencer marketing instead of athlete marketing. And we could talk a little bit about that, but the only reason I hesitate, that's a little bit harsh, is they were working with a group of athletes from groups of people who have had fewer opportunities in the outdoors, marginalized groups, athletes with disabilities, and they had some incredible athletes. Hands down, they were athletes, but they saw them in the influencer bucket, or it felt that way, and so they kept them while cutting us. And so it got messy, like so many of these things do. And so I just don't want to, there were athletes that were kept, but Eddie Bauer differentiated them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I was kind of trying to lead into the conversation about influencers in the athletic endeavors that we participate in and athletes, and what the world surrounding social media and obligations kind of looks like, and what the difference between an influencer and an athlete is in this day and age from the definition standpoint. But how does a brand see the difference, and are the contractual obligations similar?
Yeah. It's such a great question, and such a I feel like hot topic right now, because there used to only be athletes, right? And now there's athletes and influencers, and our roles do overlap in many ways. And so, first of all, I don't think influencer should be a dirty word.
I think they like content creators, actually.
Oh, okay, content creator. But I don't what we all do is peddle influence. We do.
You represent a brand.
Do that.
Yeah.
We are influencing buying choices from the marketplace. And so I just don't think it's a dirty word. And the lines between the two can be very gray. But where I sort of differentiate, and, tell us in the comments what you think. For me, it's just a professional athlete came first and foremost from the sport, from attempting to excel at some segment of their sport. You might be a boulder, or a sport climber, a big wall climber, a track climber, a backcountry skier, a skimo racer. I'm just going to name them all. A World Cup racer, a free ride, a high altitude climber, a high altitude skier. Obviously, there are a million different forms, and many people are good at many. Many people are only good at one. Some people are trying to be reasonably good at all of them, but they've chosen to the sport comes first, and through that they gained recognition, but they still stay in their primary sports, and excelling in those sports is still probably the primary goal of their career, and then making a living is an essential part of that. And then I think from the influencer side, there's more the might not be one. The focus is not on excelling at any discipline or core piece of the sport first and foremost. It's about having fun, or finding the beauty in these experiences, potentially having a lot of different experiences instead of pouring years and years into one thing, and sharing the products they use to be able to successfully have incredible experiences in the outdoors. So that was mealy mouthed and probably not actually a description. You could see also why it crosses over, right? So trying to excel in your sport, but you're selling products, so you're influencing, and then having a great time and potentially being really, really dang good at the sports, that you're doing, but with a focus on the product marketing.
I think, what's really interesting is just how social media is a part of both of these roles. And I'm curious, do you know any new professional athletes? So maybe there's a couple out there that have been professional athletes for such a long time that they don't fall into this, but new professional athletes that don't have social media or a social media presence at all.
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm hoping you know the answer because
I
you
don't. I
stumped
can't think of
me.
any. And I think that's why the lines are blurred, right? Because the requirement of having an active social media, I think, exists for both professional athletes and influencers these days. I can't think of anyone that has a strong brand relationship without some sort of social media presence. Maybe it's not to the level that you have, but some sort of active social media presence.
Yeah, I think that's right. And shoot, I feel like we need to ask our audience now because they might. I'm trying to think if like Emily's mentioned anyone in the climbing world, like up and coming, who literally doesn't do any of it.
I'm sure
Like,
there's anomalies out there too,
yeah,
but I think
it would
for the
be
most part,
incredibly rare.
to
And
to be a professional, you need to have that avenue of influence on people or that avenue of brand representation active. And if you don't have that, avenue active, then I don't think that brands are going to be as, inclined to work with you and have you represent their products. Similarly, influencers built their brand around their audience or around the people that they influence on social media. And so I think that's where these lines are blending so,
yeah,
consistently.
and I think I'm doing a bad job at this part of the conversation because I'm still thinking what we were talking about before, influencer, athlete. And I have so much respect for both groups. And actually, I think what you said to me when I said influencer and you said they might prefer content creator. I think that might be a better way to look at it. We're both selling products, we're both working with brands, all that. For the athlete, the pursuit comes first and the content creation comes second. And for the content creator, the content creation tends to come first. The idea, the plan, the shoot, and the activity is essential to it, but potentially secondary. In the same
Yeah.
way that, like you just said, an athlete, we have to be creating content, but it might be secondary. And the influencers or the content creators, they are way, way better at their content creation than we will ever be. And they should be proud of that. Like, we were talking about this before we got online. Like Emily's out right now with shooting a YouTube episode for someone who is a fantastic athlete and also a content creator, and maybe came first to content creation, and then her athletic like totally prowess is really, really rad. And but her content creation like is incredible, and she's got a plan. She knows exactly what she's going to shoot today. It's scripted. It's not scripted, but it's storyboarded. Whereas me and Emily's YouTube channel, man, we love it. Danger Stick TV. Everyone go check it out.
No,
And
no
people really enjoy
storyboard.
it. There is no storyboarding. And we just spent a whole day yesterday with our editor talking about how badly we need a plan. What our 8 episodes in the next season are going to be, help with storyboarding, call out or lessons, all these things we need to be learning from content creation. So all that to say, maybe that's a better definition. We're both selling products and working with brands, and it's super important, but where we start from, content creation or athletic pursuit. How's that?
And I think it's fascinating. We had a really great conversation in episode 11 with the Adventure Addicts, who are content creators. I worked with them on a trip in Ecuador, and they were awesome to spend time with and understand their business. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd give episode 11 a listen, because it kind of highlights the other side of the brand representation world that we're talking about. But they talked a lot about their contracts being short term. So, they'll have a contract that's for a single post, or for a month of posting, or, up to about a year of posting. Whereas I would imagine that you don't have any contracts for less than a year, likely more than that. And so, that's
2,
another
3,
kind of,
even 5 years.
yeah, that's another kind of differentiator, is that oftentimes these content creators have these short-term individual contracts for specific posts, whereas athletes are going to have more longer-term brand relationships.
And it probably makes sense. That probably makes sense. And I've talked to content creators who are like, you guys are crazy to be locking yourself into one brand. I work with Patagonia this month, and in 3 months, I work with the Backcountry, and then I work with REI, and then I go to Mohammed. Not me, speaking for the content
Yeah,
creator. And they can make a lot more money that way than we probably
totally.
can. But maybe that comes back to the goals again. They know their content creation schedule and what's possible. I'm as an athlete, like I really want to like do this thing, like go and ski the third tallest mountain in the world without supplemental oxygen. I don't know whether it's going to take me 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. And I need a partner who's willing to be like along that road with me as I fail, or maybe don't even try because my partner falls through,
Yeah,
it's like, they're like, yeah, there's a lot of beating the head against the wall that, I can still create content, but like I need a partner ready to go for that long haul.
absolutely. Well,
And
we've
then we
go
can't be
ahead.
done. We can't be done. This is gonna be a long one, Sam. I saw you. That's why I had to cut you off. Every- Sam so badly wants these episodes to be an hour long, and I'm like, have you ever heard of Joe Rogan? Like, let's go 4 hours. We got this. We can rap, and we're just gonna have to do it again. We're gonna have to do more of this. That's what I always say. But what you mentioned when I wanted to go back to athlete versus content creator was the profession. What you were leaning into was like, this is a job. Like, and I think that was the biggest learning for me, and still the biggest learning. And when I talk to young athletes, especially there's plenty of young athletes that are great at social media and plenty of young athletes that hate social media. And that's a very natural backlash to what the last decade has looked like. But like, this is a job. And that means big parts of it might not be fun, but they create value, which is why we get paid. and and it takes hard work and hustle and willingness to do parts of the job that you might not love as much as the thing you love the most, which might be skiing powder or skiing steep lines or rock climbing. Part of that is those obligations to brands, the content creation, recognizing the importance of what the brand needs to be successful in their marketing goals, and ultimately their kind of like their goals financially and things like that. And I think it's really important to figure out if you can love that job and pour heart and soul into it, because there are loads of core climbers out there climbing at the very highest levels or very close to the highest levels that do other things, whether it's run a small business or, I know nurses who are climbing at the very highest level. I know doctors who are climbing at the very highest level. In the ski world, same thing. Like, you know, Jim Morrison, ultimate example ever, running a just incredible contracting business in Tahoe and skiing at the very highest level. And now undoubtedly he has leaned into being a very, very talented professional athlete and all those obligations on top of his, like, he just loves to have two jobs. But like, it's a choice that each person should make. Do they love their sport? Yes, that's easy. Do they also love the job of being a professional athlete? It can take different forms, but it is going to entail work and content creation and public appearances or gear design, these different avenues that we've talked about. And then one that we haven't even talked about, and maybe we save it for the next time, is like many of us are also generating income in other ways with media projects, and probably, one of the most popular ways with corporate speaking. So speaking not just to core audiences who understand exactly what we do, but figuring out ways to take lessons we've learned in our sports and translate them to the business world. And I think we provide like a little bit of like celebrityness to an event, a corporate event, and hopefully a break from maybe drier topics that might be discussed during an annual meeting and things like that of a brand or of a company, a corporation. And then third, hopefully lessons that are actually meaningful to whatever the company does.
Well, I am going to wrap it up. This is definitely going to be a part one because those topics and more we want to continue talking about. But I kind of want to close with a question for you. And this is one that I like asking people. I think it's an interesting question. I believe that no one loves 100% of what their job entails. If you say that you do, you're lying, because every job in the world has some bullshit that you don't love, has some aspect that's kind of a grind and isn't your favorite part. But there's a balance, and I believe that, you know, around 70% or greater is a good career fit. How much of your job or your career do you truly enjoy doing, and what part of that job of being a professional athlete and representing brands and building a brand around yourself is the bullshit part that you don't love?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we'll leave aside my other jobs like running a small business and being a mountain guide. We're talking pure professional athlete.
Building a brand of Adrian Ballinger.
Yeah.
Maybe that includes Danger Sick TV and the Duffel Shuffle podcast and other things that support
Yeah.
your brand.
I
But
hate doing my podcast.
yeah, I know.
Every 2 weeks, I'm
so
like,
that's what, like at least 20% of your life.
yeah. You know, of course, first I get like all teary eyed. Like, I still cannot believe that I get to be and got to be a professional athlete and paid to do what I truly, truly love, climbing and skiing the biggest mountains in the world. And then all the training that goes into that, rock climbing, backcountry skiing, skiing at Palisades. Like, the fact that I get to make a living doing this, I'm whatever, 25 years into my career, and I still cannot believe it. So I want to start there. Thank you to the cosmos, whatever it is. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, there's like a significant chunk that is a grind and I don't love. And, you know, it kind of leans into exactly, I guess, two parts. One, the social media obligations have become a lot. Like, I'm good at social media, and I really leaned in early on to Instagram and then to Snapchat because I was good at it and I liked the feedback I was getting from the audience and all those things. And I still like the actual act of being like, how can I capture this day and tell that story? So then what's the like side of it is like, now that everyone watches so closely to ensure we're meeting and getting more and more specific about want to post on Tuesdays, want to post every other week, want to need these tags, need this. Like, I recognize why those things are all important to my sponsors who I love. But when you put all of those together, if there's 6 or 7 of those and you put all of those together, every week it becomes a grind to meet those expectations. And it takes away some of the love I have. For many, many years, I could just post as long as I was telling cool stories from where I was, everyone was happy. No one was counting, no one was checking. And now there's a lot of like that checking. And so I've spent so much more brain power. Like, I didn't post today about what I was most excited about my day, which was like seeing my kid give me a high five after I fell off my route. It's like, oh, this post needs this. And so it's become more of a job. That would be the grind part.
All right. So what percent of the job is not, you know, is the bullshit for you?
Oh, you want like a number?
I want a number.
I mean, God, I I think I just like suffering so much that there's no part of it that I despise.
Okay.
But there's definitely, I mean, I think you said 20%, so that number's in my head. Like, there's 20% of my job that like I would absolutely like to not be doing on a daily basis. And the funny thing is that like I don't think, like, there are people out there now, there are professional athletes who are hiring contractors to do a lot of their social media posting and perhaps take out some of that part that they hate. And I think it's cool as long as the athlete's voice can still come through and so they're authentic. The idea that they get to focus more time on being out doing what they're best at, and they're providing revenue, jobs for people who love content creation in their team, like in the team who is the professional athlete. I think that's awesome. Like, and I'm guessing most people know that like the highest end professional athletes, of course, in all other sports where we're talking about millions of dollars, but in the climbing and skiing industry, some of the highest end now have teams supporting them for their content creation.
I don't think people know that, Adrian. I think you're breaking news here.
Well, there you go. It's
awesome.
a thing.
Well, part one for sure. I think this was a great conversation, and there's a lot more to what you do and the business of your brand that I think people are interested in. So thank you for taking the time to shed some light on that. And people, if you have, or listeners, if you have any questions, throw them in the comments and we'll add them into part two of this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. That was fun.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.